And so with us from the University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension is Dr. Shannon Rogers. And I'll turn the floor over to Dr. Rogers, and thank you for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. And thank you, JB, for the invitation. Good morning, everyone. Great way to kick off the Monday by talking about rivers and economic development. So I'll try to share my screen here. I should be able to.
While you're doing that, Shannon, can I just say a few words too,
sure,
Patrick?
Please do. Yes.
So just to add a little bit more detail to Patrick's introduction, you might recall at the last meeting that we talked about bringing in some economic development professionals, and specifically the committee had suggested us looking into the New Hampshire Office of Tourism and also the New Hampshire Department of Transportation Public-Private Partnership Program. As well as speaking with Dr. Shannon Rogers from University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension. In speaking with all three of those entities, I learned that New Hampshire Office of Tourism deals mostly in promotion and would probably be more of a partner after a project is completed. There's not a lot of resources in the discussion that when I was speaking with them that they could bring to bear during project development. I also spoke with the person staffing the Public-Private Partnership Program at New Hampshire DOT. And she noted that New Hampshire DOT isn't providing technical assistance for their program. They're essentially closed right now. However, if we do end up having a public-private partnership idea, they would listen to our ideas and talk to us about that further. So really, Shannon was the key individual to bring to the meeting. She's done a lot of exciting work helping communities leverage economic development potential of rivers, rail trails, and other natural and recreational resources. So thanks a lot, Shannon, for joining us, and I'll stop talking and let you present.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Thanks, JB. And just making sure, can folks see like my main slide that says the title? Okay, great. And hopefully you can hear me okay. A big truck just pulled up beside our window. So I will speak up, but yes, so great to be with you all this morning. My role at UNH Cooperative Extension is the State Specialist of Nature-Based Economic Development. I'm also a faculty member and teach in our Environmental and Resource Economics program. And super excited to share this with you and to learn more about your project. So I pulled together some information that's also in an information brief that we have, and I'll share those links at the end. But really, I wanted to just give you some examples of a few communities in New Hampshire that we have been studying as it relates to rivers and economic development. But I should add that we love Vermont as well. I was part of a multi-state grant recently where we looked more at different trail town programs, and we actually spent some time in Brattleboro kind of assessing their trails and their downtown with our colleague at UVM Extension, Lisa Chase. So super excited to, again, be talking to your committee, and also want to note that I had a great graduate student work with me on some of this work, Julia Jones, so some of her research is represented here as well. So just a quick little background on UNH Cooperative Extension. We have 4 program areas. We're the main outreach arm of the university. Most folks are probably familiar with our agricultural and forestry services, but we do also have a youth and family team, and our smallest team, but we're mighty, is our community and economic development team. And my position within that team is fairly new. I've been here about 3 years, and my background is in ecological economics. So I study and do applied research and training about how people use and value nature and the environment. And we built this new area that we call nature economy, which has nature-based economic development under it, because my colleagues and I found that so many communities across New Hampshire and the region were indicating we have we have vacancies in our downtown. We have, we want to bring vibrancy back to our main street. How do we do that? We also have these great trails, and we have community forests, we have rivers, we have lakes, we have mountains. How do we make all those connections? So this is a growing body of research and applied work. And we've developed several programs and trainings in that space. So I'm going to go through maybe like 30 minutes of slides. Feel free to either put a question in the comment box, or if it's, if it's like a clarifying one, happy to take it right away. And then if not, at the end, we can go over the more substantive questions. I'm just going to start out. If it lets me, there we go. Okay, so I start with this infographic that we made because I was noticing, as many of you probably have, especially in New England, we have all these former mill towns that have been built with their backs to the river for really good purposes, right? For energy, for waste distribution in the past. But after years of clean water regulations, volunteer activity, many of these towns are moving more towards what has been called a river town, where you can really embrace the river for more quality of life based benefits that impact the economy, such as recreation, but also business attraction through, there's much research that shows businesses that are started by entrepreneurs. Quality of life is one of the key deciding factors for where an entrepreneur chooses to start a new business. For retaining youth, for supporting all generations across the lifespan of staying in community, these assets are really important. And so we're kind of following this progression from mill town to river town, I like to say. So when you think about rivers, there's a lot of pieces to how it can benefit a community. Economic development is one that we talk a lot about. So there can be, like I said, jobs that are either related to the actual natural asset. This can apply to all natural assets. But there can also just be jobs that are started in your community because, of the good quality of life for the entrepreneur who wants to start their business there. So tourism is a piece. We hear from communities that sometimes they want a little bit of tourism, sometimes they don't want a lot. We kind of work at that community scale to see what, fits best with their values. There's spending that is done on recreation or other activities, and property values is a big piece as well as it relates to natural assets. I'm sure most of us are familiar with property that is, has a waterfront view or is next to a really great trail. Those research shows that those properties garner a higher price than similar properties without the natural asset present. Then there's also these pieces of community vibrancy, providing places to be outside. We've all seen that during the pandemic, that being able to get out for fresh air and exercise is so great for our physical and mental health, and really supports continued community interaction during these challenging times. And then another field that some of you may have heard of that I do some research in is ecosystem services. So it's kind of a jargony term, but basically means, what has nature done for you lately? It's doing all these things for us in the background, diluting pollution, purifying water, preventing erosion, providing habitat and spaces for recreation. So we have, looked across the country and seen some examples of where river recreation, is real dollars and cents. So visiting paddlers in Georgia spend per day, not a huge amount, but it is, up to $63 per day when they come to visit a river community. But then in, another consideration that the types of jobs related to recreation are quite a bit lower than others might be in a similar field. That was in Utah. But some drivers of economic impact are longer riverways, which the Connecticut River, have super long, nice river there. the river health and its remoteness, and then community collaboration, which we see is super important in a lot of our community economic development work. So property values in river communities are something to think about as well. Values increase with greater proximity to the water. This is unless the property is located within half a mile of the river. We think that has to do with potential for flooding and the negative impacts of that. So that makes sense. But same thing with environmental quality, higher riparian scores, and upland wildlife habitats also seem to increase property values. And there are higher values observed near communities with rivers that have public access. So sometimes it's great to have a piece of nature nearby, but if you can't physically get to it in a way that you can enjoy it, whether it be a boat launch or a trail along the river, it's kind of hard to see that benefit accrued. So one program we looked to was the Pennsylvania Environmental Council's Rivertown program, which is an economic development program for towns along rivers. And they follow a similar community development process that we do with most towns. And, you know, they form similar action teams, work on short-term projects, look at branding and marketing. So as JB had mentioned, I think our tourism office does a great job with branding, and, you know, might be an asset for you once you have your product or your final piece. But really, you know, taking this approach through kind of that community development lens of transitioning on to doing action, kind of reviewing your assets, thinking about your funding, and then taking it to action. But strong candidates for river towns have a proximity to water. Water quality is good. It doesn't need to be perfect. Has some sort of population that is kind of near the river. Strong leadership again, and then potential for regional partnerships, which you guys already had this great interstate connection. And then designing a river town project, you know, having phases, having in an affordable approach, something you can achieve, and have it be visible so people can see the success. And I think these characteristics are true for many economic development projects that we work on. So some examples from that program too, though, like most things, there are opportunities or chances where failure might arise if there are not partnerships upstream, downstream, or maybe across the stream or the river. Leadership burnout, kind of trying to maybe do too much at once and too big. Grant cycle dependence, we find that with a lot of communities are waiting, you know, for the next grant, and then community conflict and land access. I'm sure none of these are unfamiliar to you all. But something neat I wanted to share kind of after we did all this research, and then I'll show you how it was applied in several communities, is we found that there were some of these critical characteristics to assess. So out there in the world of economic development, we have some measures, and in planning too, measures of vibrant communities and different characteristics that kind of successful communities have. And so we've narrowed those down and pulled together ones that are related specifically to river towns. For example, it's like I was just talking about with public access, having a boat launch can be really key. If there's nowhere easy to put in your kayak, people aren't going to come to your community, and then they won't spend money in your town. So if there is one, especially if it's accessible and ADA compliant, all the more better. No, there's also a lot of research showing that there are specific businesses that people who are coming to do recreation, coming to visit, but are also wanting to maybe start a business or live in your community, they're looking for businesses that they would spend money at. So that's really what this nature-based economic development is. You know, it's wonderful to have the natural asset, and we want it to be healthy and sustainable. But if we can't somehow get people to use that asset, but then come and spend money in the town or add to its economic vibrancy, then it is an economic development. So really thinking about what businesses are in your communities and what might be missing or what might be opportunities to start new ones. So people doing outdoor recreation, and specifically, you know, with these river towns or water sports, They might be looking for casual restaurants that actually have, you know, maybe some view or access to the water. I noticed when we were in Brattleboro, there was a neat restaurant that had an overlooking deck right onto the Connecticut, which was really cool. You know, coffee shops, kind of quick places, drugstore, you know, if you're traveling and need things, maybe a bike shop or a sporting store, grocery stores, local shops too. We often find that visitors who are engaged in recreation are really, they would love to learn about the character of the community that they're in and kind of, you know, support local artisans and crafters, you know, bring back home something that is local and represents where they visited. That kind of authenticity is really important. Other kind of less interesting things, but super important, are lighting. You know, if you're going to be parking and traveling back and forth to a natural area, you know, feeling comfortable doing that is super important. Then having other areas that are, you know, like a park or a parklet, pocket park, waterfront, or amphitheater where people can access is critical to look at as well. Parking is key. If people do need to know, it doesn't necessarily often mean adding parking, but just maybe making people aware of where that is so that they know there is somewhere to leave their car, and to kind of designate or use wayfinding to send them to the right places that they're going to. A river walk is a really interesting path or trail that's becoming much more common around rivers. And I have an example or two of those in the subsequent slides. And something too that we learned about, especially in the city of Nashua, New Hampshire, is that sight lines to the river is really important. So especially if you do have a trail near it, but if it's so overgrown or if there's so many invasive species, they can't actually see the river. It's tough for people to have a good experience and maybe want to come back or maybe want to stay long enough to spend money in the community. And like I mentioned, water quality, it doesn't have to be perfect, but if it's safe for recreation, that is really important too. All right, so I'm stuck here. There we go. All right, so Nashua is the first town that I wanted to talk about. So a city in the southern part of New Hampshire. They are working on, or have been for quite a while, I'm sorry, we're missing a W here, downtown, not downtown, Riverwalk. They have really, like I said, worked on these sight lines to river invasive management removal. They've also had to remove some trees, not too many, but some that were actually dying and, you know, needed to be removed anyways. But as you can see, we've got some Japanese knotweed here. You know, I'm pretty tall, and walking along parts of their river walk last year, I couldn't see over the knotweed. So they definitely have this on their priority list. They had to, they couldn't do some dredging in the Nashua River, so they put in some cantilever bridges, which are actually really cool to walk across, that kind of knit through the downtown. They do have some challenges. They have kind of a high flood risk. So thinking about managing that. They also have 2 dams that the city owns and manages to try to support some of that flood risk. But right here too is housing. So having a place for people to live, especially because this is in a very downtown area. This is some nice condos that people who might be working right over here is BAE Systems, a major employer in Nashua. And they have said that they're extremely pleased to have both the housing, but also the river walk here as an amenity for their employees. You know, when we worked in offices, but they encourage them, or, you know, use that as a recruitment tool. Oh, at lunch, you can go out on this river walk and walk into town, get lunch, get some exercise, go for a jog, and then come back. So that's an interesting piece as well. So there are some TIF district examples in both Nashua and Dover that I'll share. So tax increment financing that's been used to try to put together some of these pieces of riverfront development. in our communities as well. And like I said, they do control 2 of the the dams on the river. So that's a flood management issue to think about as well for some places. So in Dover, we have the Kachiko waterfront development, and this is a public-private partnership, also using TIF, but having a mixed-use development, residential units, and commercial space. Now, this has been going on for quite a while, since maybe the early 2000s in Dover, and they have been trying to generate a waterfront plan that's very sensitive to the changing climate and issues. So the Kachiko is a tidal river and has been, there have been rises in its high tide and impacts to the community from that. So trying to think about, that right here, their design includes a lot of green infrastructure right by the river to, again, think about flood risk and management there, but also to provide a really nice space to the outdoors for people who are living and working in this place. And so this project is moving forward slowly but surely, and has some really neat, plans for the Riverside Park. There is the boat launch has gone in, and it is also an ADA compliant boat launch. There is a bit of a park currently there, but plans to make a bigger amphitheater for outdoor activities. Right here's the boat launch picture. Very exciting to see folks using that. And then, so I've given you some examples from some big cities. Now a smaller town, Wilton, New Hampshire. They are a great example of perseverance, and also how a smaller town can kind of take advantage of its river. Well, so there's 2 rivers in Wilton, the Sauhegan and the Storybook, I think, come together in the downtown, and they, have some challenges in the past and continue to with vacancies on their small main street. So they really tried to be visible with their Riverwalk work, try to make it achievable. It's only a mile long currently and affordable. They've been trying to put together kind of a multi-pronged way to fund it. So it highlights some of the existing features in the community, such as their lovely library. And same thing, this community was built with its back to the river. So there are some challenges with kind of re-embracing the river and thinking about, who owns the different land and the access points. There are some areas of private land that have not been able to connect yet to the Riverwalk. But the idea is to try to draw some traffic to the downtown of Wilton. All right, and I forgot I had Franklin in here as well. Many of you might be familiar with the activity that's going on in Mill City Park at Franklin Falls. So really great whitewater rapids for those folks that enjoy that, and wanting to make Franklin a destination really regionally or even nationally for whitewater rafting. Other examples of public and nonprofit partnerships. The Whitewater Park has also looked to connect with a mountain bike track. There's great kind of mountain biking in that area. This is also a lot of Army Corps facilities land as well. So a partnership with that. Ideas about a park, outdoor museum. A lot of this is still in the works, but they are chipping away at it. And they have in the past done the events around the river, these Winnie River Days. So that's something we see communities thinking about as well. How can you have an event when we're able to do that safely, but to bring people together around the river, their natural asset. And they also have done this Snow Bash boat crash, which I don't know as much about, but sounds like they're trying to utilize the 4 seasons of New Hampshire weather here. Another example of a community, Berlin, New Hampshire, has also really looked kind of that festival idea with their River Fire Festival, which some of you, I don't know if you might have heard of Waterfire. It's in Providence, Rhode Island. Really neat event that brings together arts and the outdoors. So they kind of light up torches and lanterns along the river. And in Providence, it happens pretty much, every week or every other week in the summer. It's kind of a neat way to, again, bring people to the downtown, and they have food, and there's artists out selling their works and music. Really fun. So Berlin was inspired by that in the early 2000s, and they do a river lighting kind of just one time a year, but they also make some events around it as well as a 5K run. Here's a picture of the Androscoggin River. So folks may know too that the Androscoggin in Berlin, very industrial river, mill history, also provides some power and is dammed. So there are some, just considerations with that. So it's not as good of a candidate for maybe recreation. There is some fishing, but the dams can make it a little harder for some of the recreation, but they have kind of embraced this more festival approach. And they also do something with pumpkins too along the river and on the bridges. I may not have a picture of that. Nope, there they are. Yep. Okay, those are the pumpkins along one of the bridges that they light up as well. And then this was, this led to them thinking about doing a river walk, which is becoming a more popular approach. So they were trying to think of how they could do that in an affordable way. So looking for funding from DOT, but also taxpayer funds. And again, like I mentioned, this idea, there is significant hydroelectricity on the Androscoggin. So it's that balance of trying to, that's a key use of the river energy, but then also people want to use it for recreation. So that's not a tension, but it's something that we do see a lot in communities, and really it comes down to how the community wants to balance that. I don't think there's a one size fits all approach for any of this work. So we really try to understand the specific characteristics of the community or the region and what that community values and their goals around their economic development goals. All right, so I do have some more information here. I'm going to also show you on the website, but I have these links that I can share as well. But really, I wanted to give you that as food for thought. I'm going to stop and just share my web browser so you can see our web page as well. Here we go. Always to switch over. Let's see. Are you guys seeing the UNH Nature Economy page? Okay, great. Thank you. So I know I kind of breezed through a lot there, but we have a lot of resources on our webpage. It's a little bit messy right now. We're in the process of transitioning to a new webpage, but I don't believe the URLs are going to change at all. So bear with me. But we have our Nature Economy page, and this is our tagline, Strengthening Economy Through Nature. And we have a whole section on rivers and economic vibrancy, which for the most part right now, we have this brief that I did have that additional link to, and that goes through a lot of those case studies that I just shared in a bit more detail. And we have some other fact sheets about water recreation. We also, so it's interesting. I personally think of rivers as like a blue trail, but it's when we communicate to some of our audiences, having rivers separately does make more sense. So we have a whole section on our Downtowns and Trails program, which is similar in some ways to the Rivertown work, but also focused more on green trails or not blue trails. So there's hopefully some good pieces there of information that might answer any follow-up questions. But really, like I said, I wanted to do that overview as some food for thought, and I'm happy to have a discussion now or take specific questions from the group. Hopefully I didn't go too quickly there. Looks like Steve has a question. Thanks for raising your hand, Steve. Oh.
I just wanted to unmute. My question, thank you very much for the presentation. Very nice. My question is for JB. I'm assuming, JB, this will be available online like everything else?
Yes, if that's okay with Shannon, I'm assuming you'll be okay with us sharing that. We
Yeah,
can put that
that's
on our
fine.
webpage and make that available after the meeting.
Absolutely. Yes, we just asked that you, if you're going to reuse any of the figures, just to note that it was from UNH Extension or something like that.
Great, thank you.
Shannon, I have a question
Sure.
for you. You said one of the economic drivers for river communities is river remoteness. And I was thinking whether, what do you mean by that, or could you explain that further?
Yeah, no, and I may have been confusing on that. That's a good question. Thank you for asking to clarify. So it kind of depends. What we saw is that it's like you have to assess the level of remoteness for certain rivers. Some people, and it also depends the type of economic development you want. If people are going to be traveling and spending, to go to a trip, the remoteness of a river may be really appealing to them. So that might be for more overnight visits, longer experiences. But what I've mostly shared is rivers that are not remote, right? That most of us can access. And that is what we think similarly with our trail work, is that when people can easily access the natural asset, that's where we see more opportunity for economic vibrancy. So it's really kind of on a spectrum, and it depends what type of experience or development approach you want to take. If it's more this quality of life, getting maybe more day visitors, supporting people who live in the community, attracting new entrepreneurs, attracting new people to live and move to your community, then I think it is more related to the access and the proximity. So yeah, I'm sorry, that was slightly confusing. Steve, did you have another question, or is the hand still up from before? Okay. I think it just stays up. Okay, I write it.
Sue, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. Did you say that property values increased, but not within a half a mile?
Yeah, exactly. That's what we've seen in the research. It seems like it wasn't definitive, but what we took away from it was that they started to decline a bit when you get within that half mile, just because of the flood risk and those impacts that it might have on, having to carry flood insurance, and people maybe not feeling as comfortable with that risk.
I'm wondering about those new residential units in Nashua and Dover. I bet they're not cheap.
No, especially in Nashua. In Dover, they are making an effort to make them partially more affordable housing.
Right.
Yes, but you're right, they are not. And that is, I think you're right too. It's very nuanced. The situation in Nashua, like I said, they do control those two dams, so they do work hard to reduce that flood risk. And I think that people are maybe factoring that into their decision making, but kind of looking across the spectrum of the national data on it, it did seem to, right. So I think good point well taken.
I've got a couple more questions, if that's okay, Patrick.
Keep going, JB.
So, we're working on a conceptual plan right now for the river for this project area, and it's interesting. There was no coordination with you whatsoever on your presentation. I just knew kind of what you were going to talk about, but I know a lot of interesting ideas came up that we're thinking about. Better boat access, a river walk, not necessarily river walk along the waterway as opposed to across the waterway, but same kind of the idea, I think. An amphitheater,
Addressing the invasive species.
Yeah, invasive species, lighting, all those things we've been talking about. So it was encouraging for me to see that I think we're on a good track. We're thinking about things that we need to be thinking about for the project. So that's, I guess, more of a comment. A question I have is, when we're looking to implement some changes to the area that we're looking at, we may be looking at programs from rural development or EDA, and having to show or demonstrate economic benefits of our project. I'm anticipating that might be a source of funding that we're going to be looking at. And I wonder if you have, if we could talk a little bit about, and you could share some ideas that you have on how to go about demonstrating economic potential of, I guess, nature-based economic development.
Yeah, that's a great question, JB. Yes, and we did not coordinate on the presentation, but it sounds like you guys are all thinking, right on, as you should be. So I agree with you that USDA rural development especially could also be a really good resource. JD, I'm just thinking, I'm not sure, did I ever send you Christine Kimball's contact information? She's in Massachusetts and she's, okay.
You have, and we actually, through Michael Kowalczyk, who's on the line with us, who's working on rail trail work in New Hampshire. He's been in touch with her as well on some rail trail development opportunities.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Yes, because I think, the sooner, right, you connect with them, just let them know what you're doing. I think she could be really helpful to help you describe those impacts. But sure, it can be hard, almost impossible to do some of this work in just monetizing every aspect of it. But we do have enough data to show that in other communities, so Berlin itself hasn't done an economic impact study of its river fire. But the water fire example I gave in Providence, they have an economic impact study that was conducted by the Army Corps of Engineers that shows kind of significant, yes, it's a much bigger river and it's a sustained event. Like I said, it happens frequently throughout the summer, but they were able to look at number of jobs created, spending generated, and that total economic impact for the region because of this river-based event that they were doing. So there are examples that we can look to. Something that we have been doing with our communities through our Downtowns and Trails program is we train individuals like yourself or economic development committee members to go out and conduct surveys of people coming to their community and also residents, but specifically the visitors. We ask them, what are they spending money on when they come to your community? And so that can help you get a sense of what people are spending, but then also the potential for, if you do, bring this project to fruition, when you do, where you might see more potential for spending. So people may say, well, I really would have loved to stay longer and get some ice cream or, go to a bookstore or a coffee shop or something, but I couldn't find that, or maybe they did. So getting that data can be really helpful, and it doesn't have to be a huge effort. The work we have done in Bristol, New Hampshire, with their bike path that connects their lake to their really cute village center that is still needing, development help. Their community volunteers over the span of about a month were able to collect, like 100 survey responses, just kind of going out and being in community. COVID has made that a little bit harder. We are adapting on how we do that type of survey work, but the fact that it is outside does help. Typically you're kind of running into people either at maybe, this would be either along the river, on a trail, at a farmer's market, those sort of things. So, groups can collect their own data, and, working with USDA, they can help you kind of frame it in a way, or frame the collection so that you have the data to support your your application when you go for it. And USDA, I guess something I should have also added is a really key characteristic. I just remembered it might not be in there, is restrooms. That is something that USDA Rural Development will provide resources for, is building public restrooms. And that is so key to getting people to stay in your community, because we all know, right? Like if you can't find anywhere to use the bathroom, you're going to leave and go to the next community. Getting a thumbs up. Yep. So that is, it may not be as exciting as some parts of economic development, but it's a really important thing to think about when, looking at those characteristics. Another thing communities can do, and we do this with a lot of our programming, is we take those characteristics, we put them in to ArcGIS and do a kind of mobile data collection thing with phones and train our community members to do that. But you could even just print them out on a piece of paper, which we've had people do as well. Take those characteristics and look around your two communities and say, what do we have? What do we don't have? Or what is missing? Or what needs a little bit of an upgrade? And even though that isn't specifically dollars and cents, it shows that you've done kind of a research-driven assessment of your potential and your opportunities. And I think too, just looking at I can try to dig up some more examples. We do have, on one of those pages I shared, we have a fact sheet about the economic impacts of water recreation in New Hampshire. So swimming, boating, and fishing are the top 3 that we see in New Hampshire in terms of popularity. And we have some data on that that can be used as well. So I think it's kind of piecing together a mosaic or a story about, the type of work that you're trying to do, because doing a full economic impact study of a potential project is really a big investment, and most communities can't do that.
Can I ask another question?
Please, yeah, absolutely.
One thing that we've been talking about, so I'm wondering if you can speak to some of the river communities and how they maintain their infrastructure after they've decided to enhance, the amenities around the river. I saw in Wilton, you talked about taxpayer dollars, and no one's ever excited about that.
Right.
But so, one of the things that's been brought up by the director over at Wyndham Region Commission was this idea of concessions, sort of helping pay for some of the, amenities and resources that you have. Let's say you're giving access to public property to have a kayaking business or something, or you're bringing in food trucks, or you're allowing for farmers markets, or allowing to rent out. We've even talked about, let's say renting out a piece of the bridge for a wedding party, or, wedding photographs. I'm kind of going all over the place there, but I just want, maybe if you could talk more about how realistic these types of spin-off business ideas are, and also how that can be used to maintain infrastructure.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it sounds like you're all being even more creative than many of the communities that we have looked at. No, I love that idea. I think I don't have any good examples of kind of concession-based, using that for maintenance, but I do think that sounds like it has really neat potential. And the examples that I've given are often, there is some federal funding, there is some taxpayer somehow through, however, the individual community has decided to allocate some funds. Here in Durham, we have, some funds that go toward land stewardship. It's just how they make up the budget. And we have a land stewardship coordinator who's part-time position. But there's also a lot of volunteer work that goes into maintaining trails as well. the city of Nashua has made it a huge priority. They are the only city in New Hampshire that I know that has an actual riverfront development plan that's, you know, it's separate and a master plan, kind of separate from their regular master plan. And so they have quite a bit of staff time dedicated to those invasive species removal. But another example of a program we have here at UNH is, maybe some folks have heard of it, it's called Nature Groupie. And what it does is connect volunteer groups with volunteers who want to do things to support the environment. And it's not just New Hampshire, it's all New England. And so we see communities really leveraging that volunteer experience and expertise to do some of the maintenance. I know that's not always an ideal approach, but that is what we often see in these smaller communities. I know Wilton has, you know, they have gotten some grants, they have used volunteers, but the maintenance, it is important to think about that and to see if it can be built into the existing community's budget. Maybe there's a way, you know, kind of, it would be ideal, I guess, if the rooms, some of the rooms and meals taxes that, you know, came from hopefully increased visitors went to maybe a small portion to that maintenance. But that's a really good question. And maybe that's something we need to pull together more, is more specific examples of the maintenance issue, because I think you're right, that can be something that we hear deters a project like this. And it's such an important piece to keeping people coming back to your natural asset, right? If they don't feel comfortable, or right, if it was really overgrown and didn't feel like a good experience, then they probably won't come back, and they might not want to pass on the idea to others to share as well. Looks like Michael has a hand up.
Yes, Shannon, I agree. And all the trail work I'm doing in the Monadnock region, which is 3 major rail trails and the 13 different towns we're dealing with, maintenance comes up all the time. And it's questions of who's going to do it, who owns the equipment, where are you going to store it, how about the insurance, who's scheduling it. But yet a lot of the grants want to know what the maintenance is going to be, because they're pumping a lot of money into it and they want to make sure their investments is being preserved and it just doesn't deteriorate, you know, over 5 or 10 years. So I would agree, maintenance is a significant subject and something to really consider.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. And nice to see you, Michael. Right, and in New Hampshire especially, we have this volunteer infrastructure for so many. You know, I was listening to a winter city presentation last week that the city of Portsmouth put on, and one person was sharing how it's, you know, part of a trail that they were talking about. You know, it's just this one really committed volunteer who has a groomer, and he goes out and does it, and you know, we're thankful that he's there, but right, it doesn't feel very sustainable. And like you said, Michael, not sure if when you write that into a grant, how that's going to look to a funder. So yeah,
I guess one last comment around it. So I live in Swansea, and what's working so far for us is we have a couple snowmobile clubs that use the trails. They do some work. We have a trail club in Swansea that does some work, and we also, the DPW for the town of Swansea is willing to help out where they need their help with things like dump trucks, you know, more when we need like bigger equipment, and they have it. As long as we can schedule around their schedule, they're willing to help. So right now it seems to be a combination of the 3.
Yep, those public-private nonprofit partnerships, exactly. Yep. No, but I love your ideas. And I mean, JB, you'd know better than me, but I know that food trucks are becoming, or maybe communities are becoming more comfortable with them kind of through the pandemic. I know it has been a bit challenging in some communities, but that sounds like a really neat idea.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up, this isn't necessarily a question for you, Shannon, although I feel free to pitch in, but this is more for the whole group, and particularly for folks in Hinsdale. is your presentation when you were talking about property values along the river and how they increase, especially if you can take advantage of the river. And then you also talked about how having sort of support, the private sector providing support places for people to go, near a nature-based driver of an economy. And it just makes me think a lot about whether there should be some thinking, if Hinsdale should start thinking. I know that they're thinking about Route 119 and opening that up for business development when the new bridge is constructed. With respect to the project that we're talking about today, I just wonder if there are conversations that could be had, opportunities to create even a higher and better use for some of the lands. There are not many developable lands. They're really just existing developed lands near the project area on the Hinsdale side. But I'm thinking about George's Field and, thinking about whether there is capacity for additional development in there that would, complement this river amenity. And if there are, discussions that could be had between the town and Deborah George, the owner of that development, about economic development opportunities for leveraging, some of this potential, improvements to the waterfront. And then the other one, of course, is Norm's Marina, which is, I think, ideal for and definitely complements already, river activities. But there might be things that they can do to expand their business model or improve it in some way to make it maybe more accessible to more of the community, or provide other resources like eating or those kinds of things that people might be looking for. I'm just curious if folks around the table here, the virtual table, have thoughts about that. And Smokey, it looks like you do.
Yeah. First of all, I think Deborah George's property is built out as much as it can be under the current zoning ordinance. The next property adjacent to it has a deed restriction that can only be used as residential. There is one small lot beyond that, and yet Norm's Marina. And then you have 3.5 to 4 miles of inaccessible river access, either due to terrain, state ownership. So there's no access to the river for a considerable distance south of the current bridges of the project. And there is about 100 acres that's owned by the state that was the old railroad land, which could be developed with the state's blessing, but I'm not sure that will happen. I don't see a lot of positive possibilities along the New Hampshire side because of those restraints. With the exception of the existing ones, you also have a couple of properties upstream from the current bridges, which is privately owned, but there's a minimal amount there as well, and they're all residential at the time. That doesn't mean that they can't change. But the other three, George's Field, which I think is filled up, and then the next one, which can only be used by deed restriction for private, it can't be used for public or commercial uses, and Norm's Marina is pretty well built out, although I understand that they're talking about developing that, and they're working with the town, or at least asking the town of Brattleboro to use sewage facilities over there. Certainly Steve could answer that question a lot better than I can. If there is talk of that happening, I heard there was.
Yeah, and just to be clear on my comments about Norm's Marina and George's Field is, and where I'm thinking that the public sector, the town leadership could talk with the private landowners is, okay, it's built out according to current zoning specs, but that doesn't mean, are there opportunities for more flexible zoning to do something more creative in the area that makes it, like I said, a higher and better use that takes full advantage and leverages this potential resource. That's really all I'm saying. I'm thinking about, are there flexibilities that could be pad to increase your tax base while also providing resources for people visiting that part of the waterfront.
JB, I was just thinking of something too that I may have failed to mention. We initially thought with a lot of this nature-based economic development work that the business portion had to be right next to the nature in order to drive that spending. But what we found is that if there is good signage and encouragement, then it doesn't necessarily have to be abutting it. People are willing to drive a few miles to find a great brewery or to, you know, go somewhere to a cool artisan shop or something, as long as they know that it is something to do, you know. And obviously having kind of the digital connectivity is helpful. People will go and look up on their phones. But it can just be a sign, or like, did you know there's a great ice cream shop, you know, 2 miles away? And maybe that advertising, if community or businesses, you know, maybe they pay a fee and some of that goes to the maintenance of the resource as well, to have their sign kind of at a trailhead or in a parking area. I'm not sure, in, you know, in terms of the specific community regulations around that, but that is what we have seen. People are willing, as long as they know that it's there.
I saw that you had your hand up, Jason, but before I call on you, I want to see if Steve Barrett had anything he wanted to offer about plans or requests for cross-border sewage that Mr. Smith brought up.
Oh, that's correct. There's been discussion over the years many times about bringing wastewater over, you know, to our treatment plant from Hinsdale. And then the other piece of that, of course, is the old railroad bridge, which would probably be more accommodating for trails to link Hinsdale with their commercial and residential property into, you know, back from both from Brattleboro and from Hinsdale to Brattleboro. And that when we did the wastewater treatment plant upgrade, we purchased property along the old railroad yard there. It goes up to the bridge. So we have one little missing link there, but I think that's another piece of this whole puzzle too. But there is consideration for wastewater to Brattleboro from Hinsdale.
Mr. Cooper.
So along that line of thought, I know we've been trying and talking about a trail coming over that rail bridge and heading up into where the railroad station is. Certainly the gas plant has been sort of a roadblock since the town does not have the ability to cross or access this, and they have seemed to be unwilling to participate in that. I've heard that there was discussion of continuing the Fort Hill Trail instead of over that bridge up along the New Hampshire side of the river towards the marina and bring it up that way. I only heard that, and I didn't know if there was actually any plans for that. Patrick, you were going to respond?
You know, there was a gentleman who was, I think he just left, who was pretty knowledgeable about plans for trails. Is he still with us? I think his name was Michael.
Michael.
No, he just dropped off.
Ah, that's too bad.
Yeah. I can tell you that in my conversations with Michael, though, that it's been, that there's a lot of, there are slope constraints along the river that Smokey was just talking about that may make it difficult to do that. And then, of course, getting access over private land through Norm's Marina. The solution I have heard about is getting placing an access point that leads from basically the terminus of the Fort Hill Branch Trail where it meets that trestle bridge, getting some sort of easement that allows people to access Route 119 from that area, and then having an on-road trail that would lead eventually to the our project area.
That would certainly, that'd be one way to make the connection a little precarious if you're talking about having you know, kids and families on bikes traveling along the road. And to the extent that you can minimize that is always desirable. And of course, the closer you can get to the water, the better. I've walked some of that, and probably most of a mile north of the Fort Hill, end of the Fort Hill Trail where it meets the bridge. There are sort of river terraces, if you will, along the riverbank that would be very functional for a trail. I don't know how far Norm's property goes. It doesn't go all the way down to the railroad bridge, does it? And then once you get, even if you did come up on Route 119, if there was any possibility at all of putting the trail under the new bridge, would mean that you wouldn't have to have people on foot or bicycles actually crossing the 119 traffic. And that would at least offer an opportunity to come down onto the island in a safer, more desirable way. And it also gives access to all of the businesses. Shannon was talking about the proximity of businesses. There's several businesses in the T-Bird, there's ice cream shops there. And so allowing that connection, that's all within a mile or two by bike trail, foot trail, ski trail, that not only brings access to those businesses, but also brings the connection from Hinsdale itself down onto the island that we're discussing. And even if we were finally able to get a trail over the railroad bridge and up the Vermont side, that could create a nice little loop that people would want to travel. It would be a couple of miles long where you go down one side, cross the railroad bridge and back up the other side. That'd be a sweet little loop for people to be able to enjoy in the community. So that's all I had.
Assets. Developing assets. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Rogers. We appreciate your time and your expertise and the presentation that you shared with us. Last call for any questions for the doctor.
Feel free to reach out with questions. JB has my email, but I also put it at the end of the slides that I'll share, and good luck. Just wanted to give you some food for thought. So happy to talk about specific things as you move along, if that's helpful at all. So
Thank you, Shannon.
thank
Thank
you
you.
all. Take care.
Thank you.